Welcome to the third episode of Just Cause, the podcast of the Just Love Collective. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Dilys, and we have a great conversation to share with you in this episode. I was so excited by it. We get to talk with Dr. Kevin Burton about his research in Adventist history and his forthcoming book.
Dr. Burton is Assistant Professor of Church History and the Director of the Centre for Adventist Research at Andrews University. His book will be published in mid-2026 by New York University Press, titled Apocalyptic Abolitionism: How Millennialists Helped Abolish Slavery and Reform America.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We'll be back at the end of this episode with a homework challenge from Dr. Burton to our Just Love community.
So, Dr. Burton, why do you study Adventist history?
I love learning. I mean, that's the first and easy answer, but I also love to generate new knowledge. And that may be a little bit kind of surprising or interesting for some of your listeners to think about. Because doing this work as a historian, you get to work at a level that's deeper than just like the books and articles that people will read. You get to actually produce those things. And so I enjoy telling stories that you can't tell without going into the archive and looking at sources and things that like hardly anyone ever sees or reads or looks at, and finding stuff that even other specialists in the field have never heard of. And so that's a lot of fun. I think it's very much, if you have that sort of childish love for buried treasure, there is definitely that sort of element in what I do. And I think that doing history in this kind of research, it is super fun and super enjoyable for those reasons. But then also to find really important things and to tell people why they matter and say, hey, we need to not forget this core thing. I think that's really rewarding in other ways as well.
So let me bring you back to one more specific part of that question, the Adventist part of it. So
Sure.
I really love what you've said about history. Why Adventist history?
I think because, I'm an Adventist. And so I like to know about my own identity, my own religious identity, where the church began and where we have come after all of these years. There's a lot of years that have passed already. And so I think there's those major questions that we sometimes ask in terms of our identity, in terms of faith and so forth. It's like, well, what were the pioneers thinking? What was driving them? What was motivating them? Why did they start this thing that I am now part of? And why does it matter? Why did it matter to them? And why should it matter to me and us, all of these years later? So
I love that. Because I think as someone who comes from a practical theology perspective, I'm asking the question, what do we believe? And what does it look like in the lived experience of folks? And so I love this idea of history is it's located in time with a group of people. And years later, we get to look back and see, are we doing the thing we started out with? Are we still keeping to our core?
Yeah.
And what new things can we learn? So I really love this work that you're doing. And I am so thankful for you, Kevin Burton. I love that you love to study the old things and then bring it to us, because so often we're so focused on the future that we're not paying attention to the wisdom that comes from, well, what did we do before? And do we still want to do that? And then how does it shape how, we go forward?
Yeah. Thank you. That's well said. That's very well said. Practical theology is very close to what I do. So
yes.
Yeah. It's very similar.
Yeah.
I love to study what people do and how that connects with what they think. And you're taking that on from a slightly different angle too. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So based on what you've been looking at in our Adventist origin story, how determinative is the history of who we were when we started to who we are today? Or how do we choose to be shaped, by these stories that are coming up that you're finding?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we certainly are here today because certain things have happened in the past that have led us here. And
Hmm.
so there is a sort of determinative element that's beyond our control, and that has literally brought us here to where we are. Trying to get a handle on that and a hook in that is the challenge, right? Because life is so complex, the past is so complex. And so I think that history allows us to tell stories about the past that try to help us make sense of that sort of journey that has led us to where we are today. And
Hmm.
so I see history as really about trying to help us understand our current trajectory or our current course.
Hmm.
It's not just about the future of the present where we are right now, but it's about the sort of the current present slash every second we move forward into the future. So like it's really about where are we going as well as where we currently are.
Hmm.
And that's 100% shaped by what has happened before us.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's really important for us to understand history if we want to understand who we are and where we're headed, both as
Hmm.
individuals and I think as collective groups.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm. But I also think, I mean, and this is the other side of history, is that the questions that we ask of history are often shaped by who we are today.
Oh, for sure.
Hmm.
So, how do we balance those two things of even what is the accepted story of our past sometimes tells us more about who we are now
Hmm.
than who we were 150 years ago?
Oh,
Hmm.
100%. Yeah, no, that's
Hmm.
definitely true. No, that's definitely true. And this is, I think, why we need a diverse number of voices to help us to think about different questions to ask and different avenues of research that we can explore so that we get the best and most well-rounded perspective that we can get. This is right on. And what we are finding and what I have found in my own work is that there are many important things that we haven't really emphasized in our history writing. They were
Hmm.
central to the beginning, but we've let them sort of fall off the level or downgrade in importance and fall off to the wayside a bit. And so, it's very important to ask the right kinds of questions and allow a lot of different voices to be involved in the work of exploring and storytelling for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm.
So one of the reasons we wanted you on this podcast with us is because as we are launching into this work of justice, Just Love Collective, we understand the importance of knowing the origin stories for all the things that are happening. And in 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 and our curiosity is around the way that we as Christians and as Adventists work with justice. Like, do we see justice as an underlying um, motivation for the gospel, for the plan of salvation, right? Because we talk about with the great controversy theme. And well, does our church did our church see justice, social reform, the issues of the day as important? And as a person of color, I remember the first time I heard when I was joining the Adventist church, someone from the tradition that I was in said to me, "How come you're joining a church that's segregated?"
Mm,
Hmm.
And I was like, "What?"
mm,
Because I was so convicted about Sabbath and baptism by immersion. And I was like, that's why I'm showing up, right? Like those two
yeah.
things are what I feel God calling me to. And so as soon as I was making my way in, though, I was being introduced to the tension of
Mm,
that real experience. And then going to seminary and meeting some of some of my colleagues who came from the West Coast who didn't know that we
yeah.
had regional conferences and state conferences and I remembered one guy saying, if I had known, I wouldn't have joined the Adventist church if I
Mm.
knew that this was the thing. So kind of walk us through what have you found in your going backwards and looking at our history and where
Yeah.
we are today.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you raise an interesting point, and here's something that I think is true across all faiths. There is no perfect faith out there in
Yeah.
terms of how uh, collective groups have treated other people.
Say that.
They simply don't exist, and that's
Hmm.
because every religion that we know of
Hmm.
is populated by people.
Yes. That
And
the
as
people.
it turns out, we're not that great.
No.
We're all right,
We're,
but
yeah. Yeah. Well,
things
we're
have been a
messy.
little tarnished because of
Yeah.
sin, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so I don't think that's a good argument to say, oh, why are you joining this particular faith community? But that being said, I have found some things about Adventism that really do at least show that at the beginning we were more on the right side of history regarding race than the wrong side.
Mm.
And so we had this sort of knowledge in the church that Adventists were connected with the anti-slavery movement in some form or some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly this was sort of shared by like preachers or, in some popular article that you would find in the Review or the Signs, in Australia, whatever, wherever it was, you would find some, and there would be very little documentation to sort of back up this claim. And if you looked at every historian said that, yeah, the early Adventists, the Millerites and early Seventh-day Adventists, they had an anti-slavery background, but they gave up on abolition. They gave up on social justice reform because Jesus was coming soon and there was no reason to get involved in that work. And so just let God do it all and set off to the side and, and just let him do everything. And so that was sort of the state of the field when I started. And I really wanted to know, like, well, who's right? Because I had seen enough stuff in the archival sources where I'm like, well, I don't think the historians have got it exactly right. And I also knew that there was not really any serious study of this subject yet. The most significant work was just a book chapter of about 14 pages. And so there was virtually nothing done on it. And so I wanted to go into it. And as I got into it, I realized really quickly that Adventists did remain involved and that we had a role to play. And so I thought that was going to be the story I told. And then I realized how they fit into the context because I realized that Adventists were kind of in a minority here because most Christians in America, they supported slavery either through direct action or through their apathy and silence. And so Adventists were in sort of rare air because unlike almost every other Christian, including in the North, Adventists were willing to call slavery a sin. And all other Christians were like, yeah, no, it's been around for millennia. Most of the slaveholders in the South are Christians. So like, yeah, if God doesn't like it, he may not like it, but if it's not a sin, and if it is, he's going to wink at that. So like, no one has to worry about the judgment. No one has to worry about like meeting their God and answering for this. It's just normal. It's fine. And so forth. And so this is the best you got with other Christians typically. So that's kind of where I started. I got there, but then I quickly got to the place where I realized, wow, Adventists weren't just involved. They weren't just in a radical minority here, but they also shaped the entire anti-slavery movement in America.
Wow.
And so that's where we got after many years of research. And that's where I think we have a lot of exciting things to talk about because this isn't just a story for us.
Yes.
This is a story for America, but it's also a story for the larger world because slavery was a global issue.
Yes.
And so every continent, virtually every country has dealt with a form of slavery.
Yes.
Many of them have dealt with race-based African slave trade version of slavery, and so that's a big deal as well. And so, yeah, this becomes, I think, a really important story for us and for the broader public to understand how does social justice, how does a radical and so forth and liberating idea of social justice connect with something like the second recurrent return of Christ? How does it connect with our apocalyptic faith, as it were? So, yeah, that's where we go.
So this seems like a good jumping off point for you have a forthcoming book, Apocalyptic Abolitionism. That's quite a mouthful just to say like that.
Sorry to make it hard for you. Yeah.
And good news, you don't have to sell it to me because I've already pre-ordered a copy and I'm excited to read it.
All right.
But can you give us the elevator pitch of that book?
Yeah.
And, you've been heading that direction, but, give us that and, Don't sell it to me. Sell it to Dilys because she hasn't pre-ordered it.
All right. Oh, I'm so hurt. No, I'm just joking.
No. I just learned about it. I will be.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yes.
No. So I'll give you, can I give you 2 elevator pitches? Because I would pitch this to a sort of an Adventist audience in one way, and I would pitch it to an academic audience another way. And I think you might have both listeners on your podcast,
Right.
and I can give a short answer for both.
Yeah.
So I've already hinted at the elevator pitch for a general Adventist audience, and that is simply this. The book is showing for the first time how the Millerite Adventists in particular permanently shaped or majorly shaped the anti-slavery movement in America. And that's a really important argument to make for us. But there's also a sort of scholarly argument here that is important. And so the pitch I would give to non-Adventists and also to scholars is this. I really critique major misunderstandings, I would say, of apocalypticism in the book, and also major misunderstandings of evangelicalism in the book, and major misunderstandings of social reform politics. And so I take those head on, and I really am challenging about a century's worth of scholarship on these things that I think could have some significant waves. We'll see how the book reviews go, how people receive it and everything. I can explain that a little bit more if you want me to unpack that. I can still keep it brief. Let me know if that's what you want. I don't know if people want to go deeper or not.
Let's go.
Yes. You see my face. I'm like, yes.
Okay. So here's the problem in terms of apocalypticism.
Yes.
So many scholars, in fact, I would say probably most scholars, I think it's the majority of them. I think it's almost to the level of fact. People have considered it a fact that if you believe Jesus is coming soon, if you believe he's coming before the 1,000 years, the millennium of peace that we see in Revelation 20, those people are called premillennialists. And the dominant and prevailing argument is that they don't engage in societal reform. They don't really get involved in society at all. They certainly don't get involved in politics. Jesus is coming soon, so wash your hands and just stay out of it because God's going to fix it all. And one of the key groups of people that historians have used to say this is true is none other than the Millerites. And so I said, well, that's fascinating because the Millerites actually obliterate the stereotypes they are supposed to exemplify. And so I really show that social justice, I call it a liberal reform because in terms of race, this is a liberal issue, they take a liberal side for their day. And they actually are advocates for something that people didn't think was possible. And so they liberal reforms can go hand in glove with doomsday apocalypticism, as you were, fire and brimstone kind of stuff. And so I show how that happens and how it was a central feature of Millerism. And so forth. And so that's critical. The other thing, in terms of evangelicalism, there are a lot of historians out there. Most of them are evangelical historians, and a lot of people in the streets who assume and believe that the evangelicals in America, especially the North, particularly the North, were the driving force of the anti-slavery movement. And that is a myth.
My.
They were the problem, not the solution. And I can't tell the story of Adventism without busting that bubble because all of the Millerites are leaving these evangelical churches precisely because they see them as the problem. They are supporting slavery and all the other sins. They reject the Second Advent doctrine along the same lines. And so they leave. They come out of Babylon. And so this is a story that has never been told before in much detail. There's a few articles or book chapters on the history of come-outerism in America. But what I found is that the Millerites were the largest come-outer group in the anti-slavery movement, and they were a major driving force of the entire thing. And so this really obliterates the idea that the evangelicals were formerly like liberal social justice warriors in the 19th century before the Civil War. And then later, when fundamentalism came up in the early 20th century, they sort of had a conservative turn and then become the MAGA movement that we have today in America. No, there is actually a pretty consistent narrative here where when it comes to stuff like race and treatment of women too, evangelicals have always been very conservative on these issues. They've always have been. And so what we're seeing today in America with the MAGA movement is not some sort of new anomaly. Like, where did this come from? No, this is just a consistent sort of path. And so what we see now is really just sort of rooted in sort of slavery and Jim Crow segregation that was prevalent before the Civil War. And so, yeah, this is a key thing I say about evangelicalism and where Adventism fits in sort of this larger story in America. And then, of course, the social reform politics I've already sort of alluded to in terms of how we understand it working. There is not a single history of the anti-slavery movement in America that has ever included Adventists. Although I point out this key thing, almost every history of the anti-slavery movement that has ever been written includes Adventist actors, but they don't credit them as Adventists or mention that they are Adventists. I think most historians had no idea. It's not that but there are some, and I point this out, there are some historians who have intentionally written Adventists out of the abolitionist story because they're like, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit. Like, they're the ones that always flee, to the hills because the world's about to burn. They're not the ones who are out there trying to make the world a better place. So they've literally written them out, a few of them. And so I point that out too. And so this is a pretty significant paradigm shift for people who study politics in America, especially sort of grassroots politics, and in terms of social reform, because these ideas, they just haven't been seen as going together. They've been seen as antagonistic. And I'm showing, I think for the first, there may be, I don't know everything out there, but to my knowledge, I'm really showing it for the first time. And so it has potential of I think maybe shaping the fields of apocalypticism, evangelicalism, and sort of politics in some significant ways. We'll see.
So I'm nerding out right now. Nathan said that I hadn't pre-ordered. I was gonna pre-order because Nathan said Kevin's dropping a book, right? Because if Nathan tells me that a book is good, I was gonna get it. My guy, I feel like the woman at the well who goes to the town and the people come and spend time. Oh, I came for myself and I heard, and I'm here for all of this, Kevin Burton. I am here for all of it. Thank you so much for doing this work and for inviting us to a new way of thinking about the things that are part and parcel of the human condition. As you named it, I say to people all the time, power corrupts. It doesn't matter. Whoever gets to be in charge, whoever gets to tell the story, gets the control, right? Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi says in her TED Talk, that seminal talk about the danger of a single story, is that it keeps us locked into these ideas and ways of being. So I'm super excited about, let me make sure I get the title of this book right, Apocalyptic Abolitionism, that is going to drop soon. Like, I'm super excited about that, and I am definitely going to be telling the folks that they need to read this book because I think it'll help us understand where we've been to help shape where we're going.
100%. Yeah.
And this needs to be one of our book club books for 2026, Dilys.
For sure, it will be. That's without a question. It will be. It's on there. Yeah.
So let me ask you a method question. You've said you've come up with some very different answers, some very different explanations to some of the history that has been told, some of the ways. So why have you come up with some different answers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And method is the exact thing to talk about. I did develop, I say develop because I was not aware of anyone else who had done this. I'm not sure that that's exactly true, but I used at least a very rare method that I had to sort of develop my own way through. At the very, very end of my work, in fact, at the very last moment I can make any substantive changes in my book, I finally found a term, and that's because AI got to the point where I could ask it questions and so forth. And that is, the method I use is called new prosopography. So prosopography was a thing that arose in the 19th century where you tended to go through, like, ancient, like classic studies scholars would use it for like
Mm-hmm.
archaeology. They'd go through all the hunks of stone where stuff with like people's names were chiseled in it, any surviving documents, and they would just put lists of names together with all the biographical information they could to think about it. And they would publish books like that. And all it was is list of names. Those were called prosopographies. But more recently, some scholars have done the prosopographical work, okay, of making that database of names of people, and then also moving that to the level of analysis. And so what makes my work different is that I started out by making a database of Millerite people that now is over 1,900, nearly 2,000 people on that list. And I gathered all the information I could about them. And I did it because of this. I said, okay, is it possible that a Millerite Adventist or early Seventh-day Adventist did their Adventist thing in the Millerite newspapers or sources that are in that archive, and then maybe did they also do their anti-slavery thing in the anti-slavery sources? And I said, let me check and see if I can cross-pollinate these archives and come up with an answer here. The challenge is that all of the anti-slavery sources, hardly any of them will tell you the religious affiliation of the people. It just mentions who they are, where they live, whatever. But if you know enough biographical information about them, you're like, oh, that's the same person. You know, and so I did that work to sort of bring these two archives together, and that literally opened up a huge ocean of that we can now explore. And it was literally, I was able to literally put an argument together that we would not detect otherwise. And so here's the sort of point I tell to my students who take historiography and research methods with me at Andrews. It is simply this: archives dictate and guide the answers that you reach to the questions you ask. And so they've all been curated over time. And so if you really want to know the past, you have to find ways to sort of fight the archive and find ways to sort of overcome those things that it's going to do to dictate the answers that you'll get. And so this is a really significant way to do that. And it's not, no one really does that. It's crazy. I spent 3 years doing nothing, very little, but like finding out nitpicky, like details of people's lives. And I would go to my advisor and give him reports, and I would be like swimming, drowning in all this data, not really knowing where I'm going, no argument clear in sight, nothing. And he was, I think, a little concerned with me at first for a while. And then like around year 4, it started to really come together. And by the time I was done, he was like, this is really significant. And I passed my doctoral dissertation work with distinction, no corrections, no revisions. And so you couldn't really get a better sort of take on that. And then that led me to get my book published with one of the best presses in the field. So I'm over the moon about that. So
listen, I am such a geek because you have taught me a word, and you don't know this about me, Kevin Burton, but I love words. So I had to look up prosographical, which comes from prosography or I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly. Prosopography. I left out one of the syllables. Yes, Nathan, I'm doing it. Geeking out, like I'm super excited because you're making me think, and I'm salivating, and I'm going to use that word in a sentence. Today, I promise you. And I think, Kevin, like, I just want to affirm the fact that you spent 3 years going through those archives, because what I'm hearing from you is that the archives have their own built-in bias.
They do. 100%. 100%.
And then the people who come to the archive also have their own bias, right?
Yes.
And so if you're not able to identify that and then say, well, let's ask a different question, let's make a different query. So thank you for the hours you spent going through name after name after name.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Yeah. I had a clue because I'm now the manager of an archive and the director of the Center for Adventist Research here at Andrews. And I worked there as a student before. So I was really intimately familiar with this and realized that the stuff that we buy and how we actually put themes and key terms and all of that will dictate how people access it and find it. And that shapes the whole thing. And so you have to be very critical of the archive if you want to not let it dictate and guide where you go. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're wanting to get at the truth, and you have to find creative ways to do that. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a challenge, but the book, in some sense, to use a metaphor, it's built one tree at a time, but you see
Yes.
the forest. You see the
Yes.
forest. And you're not going to be seeing too many of the trees, because like I it's a big picture thing now, but like it's
Right.
literally built tree by tree.
Oh my goodness.
So
Wow.
give us a little bit of a glimpse of, you've said you've compared these two kind of archives, these two, the Adventist, the apocalyptic, and the abolitionists and the anti-slavery movement.
Mm-hmm.
what
did you find? What was the overlap and the interplay between the two?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, it was very clear that the Millerites remained very active in the anti-slavery movement. The anti-slavery movement is changing and so forth a lot during this period of time. The context of what's going on is known as the what I call the long anti-slavery schism, which starts in 1837 and ends in 1844. And what that means in a nutshell is all of the abolitionists are shifting tactics, and they're arguing with each other about what is the best way to sort of kill this behemoth slavery, which is so entrenched in every aspect of the world economy and society that it seems impossible to remove it. So it is not surprising that we see them disagreeing over tactics. I think the same thing happens and can divide people involved in social justice work today, where they can bicker and point fingers, and they can attack each other, because really it's about a lot comes down to tactics and how we choose to fight it. But the core thing is this: I think for Adventists, it was actually because Jesus was coming soon that they pushed themselves even harder into this work. They recognized that time was short. And so a sort of line, if I can quote myself in the book, is that Millerism, Adventism, immediatized immediatism. And so immediatism is this sort of notion that we need to end this injustice right now. It's got to stop.
Right.
But the Millerites, they weren't just saying it's got to stop. They were saying, and here's a deadline.
Wow.
Okay, here's a deadline for this. We're not messing around. And if you don't have it fixed right now, you could end up burning forever in hell. Now, I say that because most Millerites believed in a never burning hell. Seventh-day Adventists do not. Thank the Lord, because that's a horrible idea. But nevertheless, that was their point. And so like they used the forthcoming judgment, the immediate judgment, the immediate second coming of Jesus as a motivating sort of principle to say, look, this is a sin. If you don't get yourself right before God and use all of your energies to try to eradicate this evil, then you may not make it. And so are you prepared to meet your God? You know? And so this is a key aspect. This is a key aspect of how these things sort of connect. And so it's not that they're in any way there is some tension, because some abolitionists who are not Millerites, they don't like the Millerite approach, but actually most of the other abolitionists, they see the Millerites as allies and they don't attack them as much. It could have been a lot more. You read about Millerism, the anti-slavery press, and they come off really quite well by comparison. Another fascinating thing, which I will probably have to really bring out in another book, is that it was really the pro-slavery press that were the real anti-Adventists out there in America, the anti-Millerites. The abolitionists and those involved in social reform, there's a few, people who really sort of criticize the Millerites, but by and large, I mean, there are so many anti-slavery papers that are publishing William Miller's own writings and promoting Millerism. It's really fascinating. And I actually don't have the space in my book to really bring that out. I bring it out a little, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more I couldn't talk about in the book that I hopefully will put out in another one. So
cool.
Yeah.
So to me, this paints a really inspiring picture of early Adventism, the Millerites, that I certainly didn't grow up with. The stories I got told of our history didn't, as we've sort of touched upon, didn't include this. So how did we lose this? How did we change? How did we, where was this history lost? When did we stop asking these questions?
Yeah, that's great.
Perhaps
that's
this is a little bit beyond your research specifically, but it's part of the story.
It is part of the story. And I've had this question many times, and so I have an answer. I think that we
Mhm.
need a historian to go through and really document and maybe what I'm going to share will be tweaked in the future because someone's going to have a better answer down the road. There's a lot going on. So first of all, here's one thing. We didn't start writing the history of the Adventist Church until like the early 20th century, in effect. Jan
Mhm.
Loughborough in the late 1890s, he comes out with one of the first books on Adventist history and so forth. He was a participant. But we didn't really start doing studied histories until later. And by the early, after World War I, we had a pretty conservative turn in the Adventist Church. And so
Mm.
this, I think, is critical when we think about, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, the timing and how the present dictates what questions you ask and how you're going to do your work. And so to back up a little bit before I come back to that point I've sort of laid on the table, Adventists started to evangelize the South after the Civil War. Okay. And so we
Mhm.
didn't really have any members in the South before the Civil War, and that helped a lot. And whenever we started to convert Adventists in the South, there was the issue of racial tension and are we going to segregate and so forth. So one of our first evangelists that goes in the South is Joseph Clark and his wife, Sarah. They go down to Texas, the area that is now basically we're around Keene and Southwestern Adventist University. And they're down there literally getting there as the federal troops are being withdrawn from the South after the close of Reconstruction in 1877. Okay, so federal troops had been stationed throughout the South to ensure that Black people could vote. There were
Mhm.
many Black people who held office for a few years in there and so forth,
Mhm.
but they pull out in 1877 and they go back home, and then the South is sort of just left to its own. And it's at that moment that the
Mm.
Clarks are like, no, we can't pull out now. We're going in. And so they go
Mm.
in at this crucial moment where in Texas, there are so many Black people being lynched that you can't keep an accurate body count. And they
Mercy.
refuse, when they go down there, as Joseph Clark says, to bow down to the great goddess caste. So they
Mercy.
refuse to racially segregate.
Wow.
And what I
Wow.
find impressive and amazing is that they survived for 16 months. They actually
Mm.
survived for 16 months. But it gets to the
Mm.
point where with the other white leaders there and the Black Adventists that are there, they are begging the Clarks to either racially segregate or leave. And the Clarks
Mercy.
say, we can't do that. We cannot bow down to the great goddess caste. So for your own safety, we will leave. And they do.
Mercy.
And so they pull
Mercy.
out. And in the wake of that, what happens is that Adventists adopted the principle of racial segregation for survival so that both Black and white people in the South could hear the message.
Mhm.
Not a bad thing per se, but
Right. Right.
definitely not ideal.
Yes.
And so racial segregation starts to sweep the South. It enters the church in that way, but it will slowly go north. And so around the turn of the century, the Adventist headquarters moved from Battle Creek to Washington, D.C. The
Mm.
General Conference president, A.G. Daniels, says, let's make the church here our model for race relations. And it was racially integrated. So that sounds nice, but what
Mm.
Daniels meant, as Doug Morgan shows in several of his books, is that
Mhm.
he meant we are going to force segregation upon that church. And he tried to do that.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
what you ended up getting was 3 churches in Washington, D.C., one for white Adventists, one for Black Adventists, and one with, I think it's about half a dozen white people that held on to, I don't remember how many Black Adventists were in that church, but we got 3.
Mhm.
And there were
Mm.
racial schisms that happened.
Mm.
Louis Sheaf is a brilliant minister. He is in, then he leaves for a bit, comes back, but then he's out forever. And then you've got others that are really involved in sort of this work. And there's going to be a splinter group where the Sabbath Day Adventist Church, a
Mm.
Black Adventist church, gets started. And so you have an
Mhm.
actual schism in the church over this issue. Well,
Mhm.
this is representative of tension rising and also moving further north. Well, it was
Mhm.
1932 that the Battle Creek Adventist Church finally split across racial lines. And so
Mm.
that's the year where Black Adventists there, they said, we're done. We can't take this anymore. We can't take the racism
Mm.
anymore. And they just started their own Adventist church across
Mhm.
town. And
Mhm.
so sadly, this moved up north and everything like that. And a critical thing that Adventists had been doing to challenge racism is through their
Mhm.
prophecy, through their understanding of
Mhm.
prophecy. They had been doing that
Mhm.
since the Millerite movement.
Right.
And a key thing was their understanding of America and prophecy specifically. And
Mm-hmm.
so they identified the U.S. as this two-horned beast that
Right.
looks like a lamb but speaks like a
Mm-hmm.
dragon. And that
Yes.
they identified it this way because this
Mm-hmm.
beast is described as having two lamb-like horns, one of them representing religious liberty and one of them representing civil liberty. And so they said, well, okay, those are good things. Those are Christ-like, lamb-like things. But America's actually a dragon because it claims to give those things religious and civil liberty, but it actually denies religious liberty to religious minorities and it denies civil liberty to racial minorities. And so Adventist pioneers said, America is right now a dragon. It is only a dragon in sheep's clothing. It is not an actual sheep. We don't have a good period in America here, and then eventually a dragon period is coming. No, it is right now a beast, and it's going to become even more beastly. Okay? That's crucial, and they are so clear on this. And slavery is the primary thing that they use to argue that case. Way more than any kind of religious liberty things, way more than Sunday laws. It is slavery. Uriah Smith calls it the prime mover. Okay. And so he's the editor of the Review and Herald, by the way, the main church press. So main church newspaper. So anyways, that's there. But that doctrine, when you get to fast forward to World War I, that doctrine does not make America very happy. Shocking, I know. I know that's very hard to understand, but try to understand this. Okay. So they don't like that. And this is at a time where the propaganda in America is 100% Americanism. That is the driving motto, the Wilson administration and everything that's going on in America. It's all about, like drumming up the support for the war effort. We've got to, make sure the German Empire is destroyed and everything, and democracy becomes a safe rule and way forward, etc. And that is anything that is against that or perceptively against that sort of project is really attacked quite hard. And so one of the things I found back in 2019, I think it was. I think it was 2019. I was going through and preparing for my comprehensive examinations, and I read in a book on the FBI and so forth and religion. This sort of, it's just a sentence where one group is being described. It was a Black Pentecostal religion, and all the people, the leaders of that religious movement, were being heavily surveilled during World War I. But then some of the agents in the FBI, some of these white agents of the FBI, they look at this Black Pentecostal religion in the South, which is not, this is not a good time for Black people in the South, especially.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the white FBI agent looks at them and says, yeah, they're dangerous, but not as dangerous as the Seventh-day Adventists. And my jaw just drops. I was like, what? What did you just say? That doesn't make any sense.
Wow.
At least I don't know anything about this. And so I looked in this footnote, and I followed the sources. I found where he was getting information, and it led me to finding a trove, thousands of pages of declassified FBI files that told the story of how the Adventist Church was heavily surveilled by the Bureau of Investigation. They take the name Federal Bureau of Investigation in the 1930s. It's the same organization. They heavily surveilled the church. And one of the real main reasons they didn't like Adventists at this time was this doctrine of the two-horned beast. And so they come to us actually 3 days after they've locked up all of the major leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They were called the Bible students at the time. They take the name Jehovah's Witnesses a bit later. But they come to our leaders 3 days after locking all of those major leaders up for 20 years in federal prison. And they say, we have all these things against you. Are you going to be in or out? Are you going to change and make positive changes to avoid the penitentiary, or are we throwing you in jail, federal prison, mind you, as well? And so the Adventist Church responds in this moment by saying, we're going to censor. And so I can show you several tracts, several books that we had published, and they changed them. They censored them, and you can see the censored copies actually have a message that says, passed by the chief military censor, and they give a date. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow is right.
Wow.
But there's one key book that does not have that note in it, but it did get censored also. And that was Bible Readings for the Home Circle. This was the most popular, probably the most popular call portering book at the time. It had sold well over 1 million copies by this time. And in that book, they had a chapter on America and prophecy, and they revised that chapter. And the key thing they changed is this. They stopped saying that America is the beast now, and they say it's going to become a beast in the future. When there's some sort of liberal takeover in the government and a Sunday law's passed, and then it's going to become a beast. But it's great right now. It's a lamb right now. And so that change is subtle but deadly. And I would say that that's a major shift in our fundamental beliefs, lowercase f, lowercase b. And why do I call it fundamental? It's because they put that beast on the first prophecy chart and the second prophecy chart that we ever made, 1851, 1863. And everywhere Adventists are going, they are preaching that America is a beast right now. It is one of the key doctrines that led people into our church. So it was a fundamental belief, even though we didn't have official fundamental beliefs until 1980. Okay? So that's crucial to understand. And so now, coming back to that point I made about historians writing the history of the Adventist church in the early 20th century, they're starting to do it in the wake of World War I, in the wake of Adventism trying to say we are conservative, we are evangelical. Another key part of the story here, I think, is this. It's during the World War I era that Adventists get called a cult for the first time. Okay. And so we had left the evangelical churches because we called them Babylon. We had left those churches because they were upholding all of these sins that God condemns.
Right.
Okay. Slavery, racism, those were key. Those are crucial. But after World War I, we don't like being called a cult anymore. And this is a different era. Sure. There is, Darwinian evolution is coming on the scene, and we don't want to go that way. And there are other things like that. And we're like, well, maybe the safest thing that we do is go with the fundamentalists. And so Michael Campbell's done great in his work in showing how Adventists really became fundamentalists during this period of time, but that came with major consequences. Okay. And this is one of the most significant, I think. And so we start to try to buddy up with the conservatives. I think that that culminates with this, the questions on doctrine and sort of getting, Walter Martin to say we're not a cult anymore. The Adventists, we give ourselves a big applause and pat ourselves on the back for that.
Yeah.
Not bad in every way, but it came with consequences. History is a mixed bag, and there's good and bad always coming up together. And so the consequences that are not good are the fact that, we let the conservative theologies that we had always, supported, like a literal creation, for example, we let that get put together with a conservative views on race, which we had never supported. And that's the danger right there. We did the same thing with gender. We did the same thing with women. And so we sidelined women during this period. We sidelined blacks, and racial segregation becomes institutionalized during this period. We start writing our history at the same time. So no, the white historians that were writing, the white male historians who were writing history of the church, they didn't have any desire to study and ask these questions so much. And so it's not surprising that it fell off the bandwagon and off our wavelength. And it's tragic, so tragic, because think about 100 years after slavery ended in America. America's going through the civil rights movement, and you have white leaders in the church telling everyone, you got to be silent, you got to stay out of politics, don't get involved in this. This is the evangelical argument that Adventist pioneers were fighting against 100 years before. The exact same argument. And so, this ought to give us pause. We ought to stop, reflect, think. And let me tell you, I have myself, and my own research has massively changed who I am. So I think it should do the same thing for everybody. We need to stop, reflect, think, and this should help us to re-engage in hopefully a more positive way.
Sure. Can we take classes from you if we're not students at Andrews University?
Oh man, I love teaching. So I love being able to talk about it more. So yes, let's do it.
Oh my goodness, Kevin, this is good stuff. So I'm wondering, how are the saints receiving what you're sharing?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
How is this landing? With us, with the church folks.
Well, you've heard about Jesus's parable about scattering seeds and how they landed in different places. Well, it's probably somewhat similar. Not that I am in any way, analogous to that sort of parable, but like,
Right.
I think I'd like to think that most people have received it well. Let me say this. When I first started sharing this in the summer of 2020, well, I did it a little bit before, but it really got going in the summer of 2020 after George Floyd's lynching in America by
Yes.
Derek Chauvin. And that it was received so well at that time by, I think, most people, although I did have some people who were denouncing me as a fake historian. Someone called me a Jesuit. Someone was circulating emails to all the church leaders saying that I was an agent of Satan. And then someone happened to send me a copy of that email. I had the audacity to confront that individual who emailed it, by the way.
That's Bible.
Yeah, we spent 3 hours in conversation, and I'm grateful he walked away from that conversation apologetic. He apologized to me. I showed him all the data, and he realized that I was right, and that he had been wrong in his understanding of the Adventist pioneers. And that to me was a beautiful thing. But to be honest with you, America, where I live, is very divided. And we see those divisions in the church. They're very much there. And so I think in general, the people in America who are against wokeism, I hope they don't even know what that is, because if they did, we have to have a serious conversation. We need to have a serious conversation anyways. But I think that they don't know what they're talking about. But people who are against wokeism, against DEI, all of this propaganda that the Republican Party is spewing forth, I think that most of them are not realizing they're just caught into this sort of political sort of game and buzzwords and all the stuff. But those kinds of Adventists, I think, do have a problem with my work. And I think it's because it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I say praise God for that, because I think we need to be made uncomfortable every now and then. The reason I think it makes them uncomfortable is because it's about the pioneers. This is about how God led us and brought us this message that we hold up as we love and cherish. In fact, Nathan, I believe you're publishing a chapter I've got coming out soon in a book that the Adventist Peace Fellowship is putting together. And I show in that chapter how Adventists worked in anti-slavery arguments into every one of the three angels' messages, right? So this is core.
And who we are.
Yeah, it's core to who we are, and not just in social terms or political terms or stances. It's all interconnected with our faith, and not just some sort of sideline item. It's the center. It's the center of who we are. And so this is critical, and I think it makes people uncomfortable because they want that old light that they had, where we just talked about the Sabbath, we just talked about the state of the dead, we just talked about the sanctuary. Those are beautiful things, but we need to be talking about how they connected with social justice on earth.
That's right.
Because they did. They all very much did, and that's how our pioneers were thinking. Ellen White says over and over again, we are reformers, and she means that in a holistic sense. We are reformers in our theology and our religion, but we're also reformers in terms of social, political kinds of things. And that is who we should be today. And if we're not living up to that light that God gave us, we have a problem. And so I think my work does make some people uncomfortable because they're not willing to accept the light that we have.
Yes.
I'm inspired. You mentioned very briefly, just to wrap up, that it has changed your faith.
Yeah.
Can you give us just a little bit of an insight into the personal impact that this work has made in your life and faith?
Sure. If it wasn't for my research in this topic, I very well might be MAGA today myself. Mercy. I might be on the side of people who are saying, anti-DEI, anti-woke. Let's put the president's, let's get people in national parks on the president's birthday and take it away from, Martin Luther King Day or Juneteenth or something like this. That would have been me, I think. I grew up in the American South. I grew up in Walmart country, one of the whitest parts of America. And I did not know that I grew up racist. I simply did not, and my kind of racism back then was not like I would have never supported violence, like actual violence, but I would certainly make fun of Black Jesus. I would certainly, tell Black jokes with my friends. Of course, we would make sure none of our Black friends were around, because we knew that they wouldn't like that. That should have clued me in,
Right.
So I mean, I was the kind of person who's like, oh, we elected Obama, so we're in a post-racist age. Thank God for all of the light and advancements that we've made. We've progressed in society, and whatever. So that's the kind of person I was. And I started my PhD with that mentality. Okay. And it really wasn't until I took a class on race and religion that I really started to say, wait a second. There really is a problem. There really is a problem that has never been addressed. It has not gone away. It was undeniable to me at that point. But then I started doing my actual dissertation research. And I've said this before. It was especially when I found that Joseph Bates, one of our founders, one of the key people of our Seventh-day Adventist Church, I found that as an Adventist, he wasn't just speaking out against slavery. He was taking actual political action. Joseph Bates was, when he became a Millerite, he enhanced and increased his anti-slavery advocacy. It did not diminish. It actually went up. And he becomes the president of his local anti-slavery society, and he starts to circulate petitions, not just to say, oh yeah, let's get rid of slavery, but also to attack Jim Crow segregation in the North, which was a Northern invention. They had solved the issue of not having slavery. White people in the North wanted to make sure that Black people knew they were subjected. So they invented Jim Crow segregation to resolve that issue for them. It's the same thing the South did after the Civil War. Okay. And so Bates is circulating petitions to have the North, abolish its racial segregation in transportation. He's circulating petitions to legalize interracial marriage. And he does this even into his Seventh-day Adventist years. And so like, I see that and I'm like, wait a second. I now see that racism is an actual problem, but what am I doing? Because I had grown up with this sort of like stay out of politics sort of thing as well. In fact, I'll tell you here, 2016 election, guess who didn't vote? I didn't even vote. Because the WikiLeaks stuff had thrown me off on Hillary, and I was like, I don't want to support that. So I got sidetracked in there, and I didn't like Trump, but at the same time, I wasn't willing to even take that action in 2016.
Wow.
That's who I was. Wow. And so I realized, I said, what am I doing? And what is the real, how is my faith actually meaningful if I don't act when I see injustice out there in the world? What does it mean? And I've come to the conclusion that our faith means absolutely nothing if we're gonna be like the people who pass by the beat up person and like go on the other side of the road.
That's right.
We have to be the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells us that we have to, like whatever you have done for the least of these texts in the Bible and Jesus's action and role on earth. A whole new paradigm is opened up for me when I started to see how our pioneers read these words, how our pioneers acted upon scripture in this ways. And I said, I cannot be silent. That is actually a sin. That's an actual sin. And so that is condoning the injustice, not doing anything to alleviate it. And so, this actually has significantly changed me. And I thank God for it, because I kind of tremble to think about where I would be and the kind of Adventist in person and human being I would be if this didn't happen for me. Because it actually took our own history to change me in ways that God said, Kevin Burton has got to be a new man, because he's not serving me and he's not thinking right. And we've got plans for him that can't move forward unless he gets his thinking straight, And so I hope that other people can have a similar kind of experience. And there are some wonderful testimonies I could share. But I hope that people who are listening who may have questions and so forth and be like, wait a second, maybe he's just some kind of Jesuit infiltrator. I'm married, by the way. I have kids.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. I have no Catholic
all
connections.
Evidence to the contrary.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I mean, just think about it. Think about the arguments. Think about what really matters and what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to, divert Adventism in some sort of unholy cause or quest. It's about upholding what is holy and what is worth fighting for.
Right.
And that's people. That's people. If we have a problem with any human being out there in the world, then we are desecrating God himself, because we are created in his image.
An image of God.
And so if we look at somebody else and think they don't look right or whatever and so forth, that is an actual insult on God himself. And so I hope and pray that we can really think and try to think through things the way God does and see through his eyes, because that it's redemptive. It's liberating. It's meaningful.
Listen, Kevin Burton, thank you for being honest and vulnerable and sharing your journey with us. And Just Love Collective exists to do exactly that, right? We want to unite hearts. We want to inspire action. And I am so thankful that your work as a historian is moving us in that trajectory. So thank you for being here with us. And we look forward to getting into some good trouble together, my guy.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. Thank you for the work that you've done to get to this point. Thank you for sharing personally, because that's a part of the equation as well. We look forward to reading your book, Apocalyptic Abolitionism, when it comes out very soon. And we also hope that perhaps we can get together with you another time and have a good conversation once we've had a chance to read it.
I would love it. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share and to talk. Thank you.
Dilys, I could see you getting excited about what Dr. Burton was sharing with us. Wasn't it great?
Nathan, I barely knew where to start. Kevin Burton took me on a journey I did not expect, from buried archives to the abolition movement to my own faith. I walked away genuinely proud of our Adventist pioneers in a way I haven't felt before, and honestly, a little convicted too. If they were willing to call slavery a sin when almost no one else would, what are we willing to say and do today?
Inspired by this conversation, both Dilys and I have now pre-ordered Dr. Burton's Apocalyptic Abolitionism, and we invite you to do this as well. Not only will you be among the first people to receive your copy of this exciting new book when it's launched in June, but you'll also be supporting the great work that Kevin is doing in American religious history and in exploring our Adventist contributions to that. We will include links to pre-order this book in our show notes.
Dr. Burton's challenge to us is simple but significant. Stop and reflect on your own history. Whether you're Adventist or not, ask yourself, what does the tradition I come from say about justice? What did those who came before me believe and do? And then the harder question, am I living up to that light? If not, what needs to change? Let the history change you the way it changed Kevin Burton.
Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the Just Cause podcast. Make sure you subscribe to this feed to get more episodes as they are released over the coming weeks. Thank you for adding reviews where you have accessed this episode and for recommending this podcast to your friends and churches.
To discover more about Just Love Collective, visit our website, justlovecollective.org, and connect with all the other good things we're doing, including the Just Love Summit, our regular Pulse e-magazine, our fortnightly newsletter, Just Love Notes, the Just Love Book Circle, and other occasional events.
We will be back soon with another episode of Just Cause. Thank you for being part of our Just Love community.